Greetings! Welcome to the 9th featurette for Hot Dogs, Horseshoes, and Hand Grenades 2. I'm Anton, game director, and today we're talking about Sosigs, our lovable, meaty characters in H3VR2 that are equal parts deadly and ridiculous. So what have we got for you this week? We're going to start off by talking about what a Sosig is. Then we'll try to answer the question, why hot dogs? We'll get into the meat of Sosig physics, talk about the rendering upgrades they've gotten, get into how damage and armor works for them. We'll talk about Sosig characteristic stats, how melee functions for them. We'll cover their new Sosig guns, and we'll finish up talking about NPCs and neutral Sosigs. So what is a Sosig? It's a 6-foot tall, sentient hot dog. In the narrative of H3VR2, they are physically a diffuse nanite intelligence suspended in a conspicuously mustard-flavored and scented cooling fluid distributed through a biopolymer body. You shouldn't eat them, though, unless you want, like, super cancer or something. The Sosigs are too pure for this world. They're affable goofballs that enjoy combat as play, even getting blown up. This is in part because they can't actually die. Their nanite goo just sinks back up with the facility around them, and they get retubed into a fresh, meaty body. From a mental perspective, you can imagine them as existing at the absurd midpoint between the role that they're inhabiting, their knowledge that they are in fact a 6-foot tall hot dog, and how weird that is, and a bit of fourth wall breaking understanding that they're also playing a game. They are always happy to see you. So why hot dogs? It's a long story at this point, but to smush it into the briefest summary possible, the game's title began as alliterative wordplay, and then a type of hot dog character for the game slowly evolved from there, piece at a time. There's actually been 4 generations of hot dog character across the life of H3 as a project. The first was the animatronic in Worst World, a little tubby in proportions, and a terrible shot. They were refined into the Mark II Wienerbot, which was made for the first version of Taken Hold. From there, the first one called a Sosig was brought to life, and that's been our central character since. And now we have the Mark IV, brought to life by Zach, the creator of Vertigo, who is taking them to new heights. But to get back to the why of why hot dogs, which I'm asked all the time, at its core, it's just because it's delightful and hilarious to me. They're the perfect character for the moment-to-moment experience that I enjoy the most in VR, which is one that's filled with physics hijinks, crude humor, absurdity, a bunch of chaos, and a bit of whimsy. So, Sosig physics in H3VR2. Sosigs are perpetual ragdolls. This means that they're always a live jointed physics object and not something being manually animated frame at a time. When a Sosig is in control of its own motion, its torso link is guided via velocity manipulation to the position in the world it's supposed to be, into the posture, and with a bunch of its sort of macro motion, moving up and down while walking, moving side to side while climbing a ladder. And when they go ballistic from being stunned, staggered, picked up and thrown, they just become a fully wibbly, uncontrolled ragdoll. The best part of making agents work this way is that it gives you all of this expressive secondary motion simply by moving them through space. So all the motion you get with them climbing ladders, winding up and landing from a jump is all just driven by a jointed physics object. As a game dev, honestly, it sometimes feels like having found a bit of a cheat code. Sosig rendering has gotten a huge upgrade in H3VR2. Sosigs in the last H3 were 4 separate static meshes that I'd swap for 3 different damage states. It got the job done, but it was a bit primitive. In H3VR2, though, the Sosigs are a unified mesh using a bunch of shader trickery to deform them from blunt damage and mask in damage regions for ballistic and cutting damage. As we've shown off before, bullet impacts create both entrance and exit wounds. Just like the body, the Sosig clothing itself is a continuous mesh across multiple links, and the clothing can have holes punched in it from damage with a bit of mustard staining along the edges. So how does damage work with a Sosig in H3VR2? Ballistic damage is calculated as a function of the imparted kinetic energy of the hit and the change in momentum of the Sosig's simulated material. We then scale this by the surface angle of the hits. So center of link hits do way more damage than grazes out at the edge of the link. When it comes to armor, damage is fractionally absorbed by the armor based upon its material class. We have 2 tiers of handgun class armor in the game and 4 tiers of rifle class armor. Some amount of the damage of this hit is passed through to the Sosig as blunt damage, even if no penetration of the armor occurs, depending on the armor class, and if it is penetrated, also some of, extra damage is passed along in addition to the penetrating strike itself. The damage does different things based upon where the Sosig is hit. Hits at the top link can trigger concussive states, even with a helmet, while shots at the lower link can stagger and trip a Sosig up. Our goal with this version of Sosig damage is to carry as much of the detail and nuance of the ballistic system forward into rewardingly varied results on the Sosig itself. H3VR2 actually has a full stat system for enemies. All of the sophisticated low-level parameters are controlled by 7 stats that go from 1 to 10, similar to what you'd have in an action RPG. Let's go over them. There's alacrity, which controls a Sosig's movement, acceleration, turning speed, strafe dodge speed and distance, and how fast they can wind up and recover from a jump. There, you've got brawn, which controls how much melee damage they do, their throwing strength, how well they can control firearm recoil, and their resistance to being grappled. Perception, which is everything related to senses, detection ranges, and how good their hearing is. There's reflex, which is how fast they react to threats and acquire targets, as well as how fast they can reposition their guns in space and swap weapons. You've got coordination, which is how precise their aim is, how quickly they can zero in on a target that they've acquired, as well as how accurate their throwing is. Grit, which is their resistance to pain events from damage, concussion, and how hard it is to make them stagger and disarm them. And finally, nerve, which is their response to suppression, how willing they are to approach a threat, and how likely they are to charge at you in melee, and everything else related to morale. You put that all together, and we have a more easily configurable, balancing, and interesting game agent to fight, and we can sort of find interesting combinations between some of those stats being very high and very low, as well as construct some truly challenging bosses. Sosigs are way better at melee combat in H3VR2. They move much more agilely, track targets better, and are better at both getting into position for a strike and actually aiming that strike as it goes in. Sosig melee weapons have a set of attack patterns each: sideways swipes, overhead strikes, jabs. What's cool is the melee weapons are moving through space exactly the same way as the player's melee weapons are. So we can put full complexity weapons like swords that can cut or even sever a Sosig in. Sosig melee swipes against the player are also more reliable than the last game, as well as parrying to deflect incoming Sosig strikes. Sosig guns are back for H3VR2. If you don't know what these are the special gun type created just for the Sosigs. The arsenal of them at launch is 12 deep with suppressed variants for each of them, spanning pistols, rifles, and shotguns. Like the player's guns, we'll be expanding the selection of them post-release. Folks oftentimes ask, why can't the Sosigs just use player guns? And there's a bunch of reasons for that, both related to design, to performance, and just code complexity. Player guns are very, very complex as meshes. They are very, very complex operationally, especially now compared to the first game. And so to actually put like a player gun in Sosig hands, we would have to somehow write code sophisticated enough to like simulate all of the hand interactions that you have to do, which would just be ridiculous, even if it ran well, which it would not. So what's new with Sosig guns in H3VR2? Two big changes. The first is that Sosigs actually reload their weapons with an object. All Sosigs have Sosig ammo cells for that gun's class of ammo: pistol, rifle, shotgun. These are another loot item, honestly the most space efficient one for you to grab. The other big change, which I do know some of you will be grumpy about, is that Sosig guns are not player fireable. We did this for a couple reasons. Balancing Sosig guns in H3 has always been a bit of a nightmare. They have to be simpler for performance reasons, and that arcadeness of them oftentimes makes them better to use, especially in a pinch, than the player equivalent version of the gun, which always felt kind of backwards. Now that H3VR2 is an extraction game, the volume of damage you can put out per unit of weight that you're carrying and capacity and effort to enact that damage has to be much more tightly tuned for this to be a rewarding and sensible experience. Having Sosig guns operate this way, i.e. only being able to be fired by Sosigs, allows me to put together combat encounters that are really difficult, completely independent of the part of the loot progression curve that level or part of the level is at, which means more variation in gameplay and cooler challenges for you without the game just breaking. H3VR2 has some new meaty friends for you to make. The Sosigs you encounter in the facility aren't all just security guards getting in your way. There are some named NPCs you're going to get to know who you're helping out. They're going to give you work orders, some of them are going to sell you things, occasionally crack jokes at your expense. NPCs will be covered in greater depth in a future featurette about the facility game mode, but I just wanted to show off some of their snazzy outfits to you now. There are also plenty of neutral Sosigs that you'll find throughout the facility. Helpful wieners just attempting to go about their jobs with perhaps a suboptimal volume of workplace explosions occurring everywhere. So please try not to shoot every Sosig you see on site. They'll appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed this peek into our meaty minions, the Sosigs. I need to make sure to give yet another shout out to Zach, creator of the Vertigo game series, who has been lovingly bringing this new iteration of the Sosigs to life. It's meant the world to me as their original creator and steward of almost 8 years to find another creator with just the perfect artistic sensibilities, sense of humor, and sensitivity to amplify their distinct Sosigness. We can't wait to have you folks be able to play with them. Anywho, that just about does it for Featurette 9. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to follow us on all of our H3VR2 socials for the very latest news and meme videos. Make sure to like and subscribe and wishlist the game. And for those who keep asking, we're going to have an announcement about the release timings for the game at the end of September. So you don't have much longer to wait to know the things that I know many of you want to know, which is when's the game coming out, how much it's going to cost. We'll have an answer for you soon. I hope you all have yourselves a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll see you soon. Peace.